recorded. Hi there, and welcome to today's Buildings New York Unlocked discussion. My name is Christina Wilkes, and it's my pleasure to kick off today's session, Rebuilding Construction, How New Technology is Keeping the Industry Going. Before introducing our moderator today, I'd like to take you through just a few housekeeping items. The session is being recorded. It'll be available for you to access on our website on demand. Please direct your colleagues there as well. Or you could also see that via the YouTube channel. All attendees are muted, so please use the Q&A box if you have any questions. If we can't get to every question that comes through, don't worry. Your question is linked to your email address, so we'll be able to follow up with you and get to any questions that aren't covered during this session. If you have any technical troubles, please use the chat functionality, and that will get to the speakers, and we can try to help you out. Now that housekeeping is out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Katie Brenzel. Katie is a senior reporter at The Real Deal, which is a New York City-based real estate magazine. Katie covers the intersection of politics, real estate, as well as housing policy and construction. Previously, she covered Hudson County, New Jersey with the Star-Ledger and covered crime and courts for the Express-Times. Katie holds a Master of Science from Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. Katie will take it from here and introduce today's panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here today. I am here with AECOM's Denise Berger and Shadow Ventures KP Reddy. We are going to discuss, the topic of the panel is how new technology is keeping the industry going. I wanted to start off with each of you introducing yourselves. Tell us who you are, what you do, and sort of where you're coming from in the industry so people get a sense of where our conversation is going to go. Denise, if you could start.
Hi, I'm Denise Berger. I'm the Chief Strategy and Innovation Officer for AECOM for the East region, which includes Latin America. So innovation is really important to me, transformation, how we do business differently, how we use digital technology is really important. It's important to the client. And the way I say that is because I spent 32 years at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, where we had 4 different modes of transportation, understood in the A&E industry, architecture, engineering, construction, the importance of moving projects forward in project delivery, and using these types of digital tools to speed our delivery and really hone in on our financial investments.
Great. KP?
Hey, I'm KP Reddy. I'm the general partner at Shadow Ventures. We're a venture capital firm focused on the built environment. So that's design technologies, construction technologies, real estate technologies, infrastructure. My background, I'm a civil engineer by training, second generation civil engineer. Been building software for 40 years, something like that these days, for a long time since I was a kid. And so we are a little bit different than most venture firms. We're deep on the technology. We actually will back some founders that don't even have a company name yet. They have a piece of code and something interesting. We also advise a lot of large AEC firms and real estate firms who happen to be a lot of our investors on digital transformation strategies. And lately we've been advising developers and owners on how to select architects, engineers, contractors based on their innovation quotient, because the last thing, if you're doing a Hudson Yards, the last thing you need is your weakest link to be your structural engineer that can't open a file or whatever. So we've really been kind of taking this advisory role with large asset owners. We've been pretty busy with that.
Great. Yeah, so, as with when we talk about anything, it's now in the context of the pandemic and what's going on in the world. So I wanted to ask, start off by asking you both how you think the pandemic has impacted the demand for new technologies in construction and design, how it's shaped the discussions that you have now.
I'll say, well, look at what we're doing right now. We're having a virtual call. So it is shaping the way we do our business, right? And I think it's a good thing. It's showing that it works. We're doing a lot of, virtual conversations, teaming, all over the world, all times. And you take that approach and you move it to the construction, right? Or design. People are designing remote way. People are looking at virtual design and construction to see how things are integrated, looking at clashes where you're not in the field visually looking at it, but you could see it on paper. Well, I'm not even saying paper, you see it in the cloud. So it's quite interesting.
Do you think that that's going to be a lasting consequence of this? That, maybe, obviously AECOM, you have work internationally, cross country. Do you think that people will realize, hey, I don't have to fly out, I don't have to fly abroad to do this in-person meeting. Like, we can have these conversations.
I think it's based on the client. Some clients still ask us to come in to give a presentation. Some clients were doing it in virtual rooms. So it really, we work with the client, but it does, what you're saying, show that maybe we can really think about it and being more meaningful in how we make our decisions.
Yeah, I think, I always tell the story. In 2011, I wrote a book called BIM for developers, for real estate developers and owners. And I still sell copies. It should be irrelevant if we're actually adopting technology. It's a 9-year-old book. It should be archaic. But clearly that tells you the adoption cycle of this industry. And really COVID's been a catalyst. And I try to remind people it's not that, an AECOM or an engineering firm that we don't have innovation capability. I mean, we're technical. We're not accountants. We're not lawyers. We're very technical people. We can actually use our computers well. It's never been us. It's actually been the customer, right? It's been the customer that's dictated, come to my office and make a presentation, come do this charrette. I was talking to one of our investors, and they said that they went out, they had a superintendent on a job site pull up FaceTime to inspect something, and they approved it over FaceTime. And when they told the owner, like, oh, I did this, they're like, well, why were you guys coming out in the first place? And they said, because you made us. You said, if you're going to charge me that kind of money, I better see your face on the job site. So it really is highly driven by your customer and what they expect in terms of customer experience. And when you have, the rest of the world is on Industry 5.0, we're still working on Industry 4.0. And so I think as your owners are more open to the idea of using technology versus come to my office, that's been a huge catalyst for change that we're seeing with the several hundred firms we work with across the board. We've seen, this be a massive catalyst to how their owners and how their clients think about things. And I think that's why we've been busier than we've ever been lately.
Are there particular areas of, both construction and design, those processes that you feel like are particularly ripe for disruption? There's a lot of room for growth. I know you had mentioned building information modeling, which obviously isn't a new thing, but just curious if there's specific areas that you think we should really be paying attention to right now.
Yeah, I think you're starting to see the breakdown of silos. I think, when early days of BIM, so I was working in BIM in 2003. So super early days, we kept talking about this philosophy of people working as a team, and it never happened. And you have design build firms that they say the words on paper, but when it comes down to execution, it's different silos of departments working on things. And so I think what we forget is, for the design community, the deliverable, the current legal deliverable are called contract documents, and their plans and specs. And that is their deliverable. Their deliverable is not a building. The contractor's deliverable is actually a building. And so you kind of have teams working together with two different deliverables that they've been contracted for. And so hopefully the use of technology allows you to create a higher cadence, right? A higher impedance around how you interact and how you, instead of, oh, I'll upload it to you at the end of the week, why not be real time in the conversation? Why not, kind of like what we do in Slack or anything else? Why wouldn't you have everybody in a room, being able to ask a question real time versus waiting for that project meeting to ask a question? And we've seen a trend, I hate to do this generalization around generations. We have seen an interesting dynamic with millennials that are wide open about sharing information to their peers and partners on a project, almost to the point of, legal and compliance saying, oh, you can't just send them a file. Like, why are you doing that? You have to have them sign off on this waiver, which, scares all the other generations. But you're seeing this generation say, why wouldn't I share all of my information with my partner on this project? Why wouldn't I be 100% transparent about what my challenges and work product are? Doesn't that help the client? And so it's interesting. You know, I think you take that cultural dynamic with digital transformation and you start to build something special.
Yeah, and I would add that the client has a responsibility too. So if the client sets up templates and standards, and if you think from the very beginning, you want a project and you want that collaboration and you want guidance, not all the clients are that savvy. So if I look at where we came from, we set those templates up. We looked at, what the project needs. We made sure that we understood what the project execution was going to be, that we understood, we established, a standard structure for the management. And KP said from the really early on, you have to make sure it's in a collaborative environment, because it's some things like sharing information, if it's not set up correctly, a structural engineer won't be able to see some of the information, and it's really important to do it in real time. So having the client do that or set the expectations really, really works well. And I believe that these are these tools that really need to be set up from the really beginning before you start looking at the project execution.
Why do you think that, I know like construction, real estate often are kind of singled out as industries that are slow to adapt to these new systems. Why do you think that is? Is it because of this sort of fragmentation in the project? KP, you mentioned, silos of teams working on a piece of a project.
I think I think a lot of it's change management. People aren't comfortable being in an environment they don't know how to use. I said to you the other day, we would still be using the slide ruler. If it was up to people. When I came in, I'm showing my age, we didn't really have CAD computers. People were still drawing by hand, and it takes a lot to make that change. A lot of it's, I think, cultural change. KP said millennials, they're really eager to do that, to learn that, where maybe some of the old timers are a little more resistant to that. And there has to be that collaboration.
Yeah, I think there's also a big cultural dynamic. When you're a professional, you highly define your work product by your work effort. No architect wants to say, oh, I designed that thing in 5 minutes because I use this tool. They want to talk about how they worked 20 hours and stayed up all night, and it was such an arduous. I mean, I had the good fortune of working with Frank Geary. I worked for him for about a year, and I saw it every day with the lights. I was always the last one to come in and the first one to leave, which is not how firms like to look at things. There's definitely this bias towards, I am toiling over this work, and I highly define my value and worth individually by the amount of work effort I put in, not necessarily the work result. And so that drives an ongoing psychology. I mean, I think if you want to see innovation happen, get rid of timesheets, right? Delete all the timesheets out of every AEC firm, get rid of all the timekeeping measures, and say, look, we don't care how you spend your time. We don't care about your utilization and how billable we are. We care about your productivity and results and how you do it. If you can use an AI tool to design a building in 5 minutes, I don't care. And so I think there's some parochial ideas around how people, the business of the business, that absolutely contradict, one, the customer's objectives, and then two, like the efficiency of how we do things.
Right. And I'm an architect, by the way, so I get you.
Do you think the market conditions that we're seeing now, decrease in spending, shortage of labor, I guess I'm wondering if those conditions would sort of push back against some of the attitudes that you described, that it's going to kind of force people into adopting some of these innovations, just because there is the push for, reducing product timelines, reducing costs.
Absolutely. So yes and yes. So the agencies, as you know, in Europe, are really facing huge financial constraints, right? Port Authority, revenues down in the different transit systems that they use, MTA. So they need when they look at their capital planning, and capital planning is another tool, your digital tool that can be used to help with capital planning and asset management. But when they look at that, right, they need to look at speed to delivery, getting their projects done faster, and managing that cost management and the tools. There are enormous amount of tools that can be used to do that, and that are doing it. So having a firm that's savvy and knows how to use it, and knows how to use it well, or maybe even change workflows to be more efficient, is going to be a driver moving forward.
Yeah. And I think you have to look at another dynamic, because we are kind of a laggard industry, it also shows in the technology, right? So you have firms like Autodesk that are incumbent players that are the worst. I mean, their technology is terrible. They just charge a lot of money. But the thing is, because they're unchallenged, they can deploy 10-year-old technology and the industry just says, great. I mean, nobody on this call got trained on using Facebook. Right? There was no training, go away for 2 weeks and get trained up. And if you look at every other industry, the adoption of technology and the user interface and the idea of training, it's all highly intuitive so that you can spend your time working in the product, not understanding the product. We're working with a firm right now that's built a great product around, how you approve payment, how the owner gets transparency into completion and how they execute payments against that. And it's in many ways like there is no training. I don't have to send you off to training to do this. It's you log in and you get going. And I think that is such an important thing. And I think when you look at a industry that benefits from a lack of transparency, right? Sharing all the information is not how you get ahead as a contractor. It is like I share the information that I'm willing to share. And my special sauce or my unfair advantage is I know things you don't know. And I'm going to exploit that. So I think with technology, if we can get the adoption cycle down by building better product, which the incumbent software companies are against because they're all public and they have to hit their quarterly numbers, you have to kind of demolish the incumbent software providers and make room, right? So it's creative destruction. You got to get rid of all those people and bring in the new. In the 90s, Microsoft dominated till Salesforce and Google and everybody else showed up. And then all of a sudden they were on their heels. So I think part of what we see is you have to start building technology that people can actually use simply, and they can focus on the creative work and the critical work that the software can't do for them.
But when you're talking about, for instance, like a construction labor force, I feel like you run into the challenge of, some of these technologies on an individual trade basis, some of these technologies are going to either replace or reduce those workforces. And I guess how do you get buy-in for that, given that that's a fact of that evolution?
That is how it works. That is called evolution, right? So, I mean, I've built like robotics companies. I was in the Wall Street Journal several years ago talking about, they're like, well, all these jobs are going to go away. I'm like, they'll find better jobs. Like if we're going to let that, nothing happens overnight, right? Nothing happens overnight. I mean, I was shocked during the pandemic when they said e-commerce is up, and because I live in a bubble, right? Of course you do e-commerce, but to find out that there's people that had never really bought groceries online, like those people still existed in the universe, like blew me away, right? Because I live in a bubble.
Those people.
so you look at that and you say, well, the industry has to start thinking about what they're going to do next. It doesn't happen overnight. I kind of look at generationally. If you're in your 60s, you shouldn't be worried about AI. You can ride out the wave to retirement. You'll be fine. If you're in your 40s, you're probably in a little bit of a stranger spot. Like you might get AI'd away, and you better start building up your skills. And I think if you're in your 20s or 30s, it is a presumption because you're a digital native that technology is all, you're constantly seeking technology to do less work. Somebody asked me, like, besides the economic before the pandemic, I said, look, it's the Renaissance age. Like when people say, what do you tell your kids? I'm like, learn how to play an instrument, play a sport, have good hobbies, have great friends, because you're not going to be spending your weekends cleaning your house and doing your laundry. and you're going to have time for other things in life. So I think the reality is, if AI is, our test of AI when we're looking at investments, tell me how many people on this org chart will go away. That is the measure of AI. It's not the tech. There's a lot of technology things, but if you're on this call and your CTO comes to you and says, "Oh, I want to implement AI," roll out the org chart and tell them who gets let go, because that is the true measure of it, whether it's AI or not. If it is, "Oh, it'll help us do our job better," it ain't AI.
Well, it's still, AI, you look at learned intelligence, and, something that we developed is called ALI, AECOM learned intelligence. And we use, machine learning to improve quality checks. So there is, AI with accuracy, clash detections that we use. And one of the other things that we're looking at besides AI is 3D printing. That's really taken off too, and taken off in London. And we're doing some work on creating some arches in the transit system that, if you think about how long something modular buildings or something that's modular, how long it takes to put something in, and then the work crews that would need to go in to replace something. When you're doing something modular and you could put it in place in hours rather than, days or sometimes longer, it's more efficient. And you're right, what Katie's saying, we're in a digital world right now. We're moving forward, and these jobs, we're looking at more meaningful jobs for people to be in.
Yeah, we have an investment in a company called Icon 3D. They do 3D printed houses, and we were like super early investors in them. And we liked it because it was robotics, material science, and software. And we have another company I invested in that does textiles, so automation and textiles. And I've been shocked at the inbound requests come from countries like India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, and China, where our perception as Americans, we say they have cheap labor. Why would they ever hire a robot? When you have 1 billion people and you have people that can do the work, why would they ever buy robots? And when I spent time in India and China, like studying this stuff, you realize like nobody really wants those jobs. Like they exist, but nobody's growing up saying, "Oh, I want to go be a masonry on a job site and make very little money." That you're starting to see even in these countries that automation is becoming a critical part, because they also have a capacity. In India, over the next 10 years, they have to build 10,000 hospitals, which I thought was a typo. Like I literally thought was a typo. That doesn't make sense. And then someone showed me the data and I was like, wow, that's 1,000 hospitals a year. You're not going to get that done by carrying bricks on your head. It's not going to happen.
You're right. So there needs to be a balance between technology and innovation, and looking, and you can't look at it as really reducing. I mean, it is reducing jobs, but that can't be the overlying issue of why not to do it. If that makes sense. Because other jobs will come out of it. Factory jobs. If you're looking at modules, so it may be a certain type of job may be reduced, but other jobs will be created.
Yeah, I will say the challenge though. I've run 2 public companies, and I've always had CFOs that love to challenge me, and they always said, "Happy to invest in that new software, KP, if you tell me where we're going to reduce expenses somewhere else." And I think as a litmus test to really have true adoption, especially in this environment, right? The CFOs are running the companies for a minute, right? When you go through these cycles, we saw it after 9/11, we saw it in 2008. Quickly, the C-suite, it's really the CFO kind of making decisions. And I think it would be nice, it would be interesting, it would be differentiated. CFOs are very quick to look right through that. They're like, no, I need to understand exactly how we're going to get our payback on this. And I don't think it's a terrible thing. I don't think it's a bad thing.
Denise, I wanted to go back real quick to the 3D printing idea. Were you saying that that's primarily being used in for prefab uses, or I just want to clarify.
Right. So it's as you're building something through 3D printing, and it's very similar to it's prefabrication. So you're building it and you're putting it in use. So yes, so it's we're using an arch. You also use it for modular housing in one of our London offices also. So it's it's something that's a type of technology that you'll see more of.
Is that being used in New York at all at this point? I mean, like in the main.
I think it is, but I don't think we're using it right now. Yeah.
Gotcha. KP, I wanted to go back to the idea of, you mentioned that you've been working with owners and developers. I wanted to ask what sort of questions you asked to vet contractors to determine whether or not they're adequately tech savvy. You spoke about that at the beginning. Curious what sort of questions are key for determining that.
Ask them what their Twitter handle is, and if they don't have one, they're out. It's really about understanding how they're viewing technology and how they, understanding their experience. It's like there's probably not a contractor on the planet, if you said, do you use BIM, they'll all raise their hands, right? And having the software and knowing how to use it are two different things. So we really try to dig in. The challenge is when you start looking at what we do as an industry, right? We design and build and operate things of massive permanence, right? It's not the iPhone 9, throw it away and get the iPhone 10. We're literally shaping the planet. And if you take a short-term view around technology, like you're stuck, right? It's already old. And so a lot of it has been to think about, right now we're working on a 15 million square foot project that we're advising on, and the owner says, whatever technology we should have in 5 years hasn't been invented yet. So how do we know about that? So really understanding how the firm thinks about new technology, how do they have a process to evaluate it? So if I say, hey, here's a cool startup, you should start using them. Tell me about the process of which you'll evaluate them and implement them in your organization. Because buying the software is like just part of it, right? It's how do tell me about the process you have to implement the software and use the software and get your team up to speed. Because we don't want to use software that's available today. We want to be thinking, 3-4 years ahead of time. And so a lot of it's kind of thinking about how they think R&D should work, how they think about adoption, how they think if you're not going to be a leader, you better be a fast follower. And how do you build social proof on a team to say, you know what, I don't know what we're doing, but since XYZ firm is doing it, we will let them take the lead, but we will be a great follower of whatever they deploy.
When we deployed as a client, when we deployed new technology, you have to have champions because you can have new technology and you can have the investment and the money to do that, and it could be cutting edge. But if you don't rewire people's mindset and decision and have champions who value it, it's not going to work. I mean, so it has to be a bottom up, top down approach, I believe. And I think you have to invest in human capabilities for them to understand the value. And you have to have that champion, like KP is saying, who believes in it to make it work. And I found that if I had a champion working on it, and that drives that growth.
Yeah. I like Denise's point. We kind of believe fundamentally that the C-suite and corporate's job is to create boundary conditions. Like you can do that, like here's the boundary, but to not be prescriptive around how people approach their work. Let people at the bottom up own it. If I'm just making it up, if I want to use Google Drive, but the corporate requirement is use Dropbox, great, you can do that. It's within the palette of tools we've pre-authorized you to use. And if it doesn't work out, that's up to you. Like that's your problem. That's not our problem. So, with autonomy comes responsibility. But I think as we think about the people in the trenches doing the work, the last thing you want to do is say, you shall use this and you shall go to this training. It's like, this is the job you have to do. Just like, on job sites, the workers kind of own their tools. They bring their own tools to work and they are responsible for owning and managing and the safety of their tools. Software is no different. Give people latitude to use the tools that they like, that resonate with them, and that they'll spend that extra effort learning it, spend that extra effort understanding it versus pushing it down from the top down. A lot of people like to look at our industry and say, oh, it's like, we need to be more like manufacturing. And I say, well, no, we're more like the movie industry. Everybody shows up on a project. They act like they've never done it before. They've never worked with each other. And then they go build something. And at about the time they're building a relationship, they all leave and go to another project. And what that requires is providing people a lot of autonomy to make decisions and use different technology that'll help them get their job better.
But I do think that you're right, but I do think that also that there has to be, like I said, with AECOM, we have innovative solutions or a global innovation to take the lead of what we're going to be doing with 80,000 people across the world. And if you think about digital innovation, VDC, there's a lot of different types of tools that are out there. But the thing is, we want people using the tools. My biggest concern is if you think about just very simple, you look at Bluebeam. So Bluebeam is something that, tracks comments and submissions. People are doing that by hand, So my thing is, and that would take days and sometimes weeks to coordinate. I do want people to use a tool. That's where I'm going with that. It might not be Bluebeam, but a tool instead of, so you get more efficiency. So that's where I say that we need the champions, because there's some people who don't want to use that tool, the new tools, right? So it's like we have tools in our toolkit, we have a hammer, but we're not using archaic tools that we would be using, like we're using now a computer, not digital slide rule. So these are the things that we have to make sure that in AECOM, that there is that type of maturity in knowing what tools work best, because it's a big company and we want to make sure that we're as efficient as possible.
Have you seen your conversations with clients regarding adoption of these tools change over time? Like not just in the past 8 months, but the past couple of years?
I think it depends on the client. Some clients are more sophisticated than others.
Yeah, there's definitely, part of, pre-COVID, when we're on our third fund, and there's a slide in our fund prospectus that, I call it the perfect storm, like why now, right? It's great. We've been talking about innovation for several decades, but why now? And one of our belief systems is, besides the new digital natives coming into the workforce, I mean, could you imagine coming into your job and them handing you like a notebook, a physical notebook and a pencil, saying, here's your first day of work, here's a notebook paper, here's a notebook and a pencil. You'd be like, I'm not working in this place, this is crazy. It happens in our industry as well, where they say, I'm gonna go to a job site and have this little survey notebook. What do you mean I don't have an iPad? Because they don't know any better, right? And so we see that, and we also see a generational shift. If you look at your average C-suite person in these firms, a lot of them are in their 50s and their 40s now. Their first job out of college, they had an email address, they had a laptop, and so they don't really view the good old days as being that good. And now they are empowered to start driving change. But I think that the biggest thing that we have been pretty vocal about is the industry will not change until we can attract the right talent, right? And the right talent means we're not going to get the top. I look at a lot of AI stuff from massive engineering firms to startups in our space, and it's mediocre at best. And part of it is it's really hard to get that talented computer engineer to come on board and say, hey, we're going to go build this, and I'm going to pay you $400,000 a year to come do this, right? It's very hard for industry to do that and attract the right talent. So what ends up happening is you're left with, I'm an architect and I went and took some Python classes. I'm an engineer and I went and took some C#. If we all respect each other's disciplines, we also have to respect the discipline of computer engineering. And a lot of what we have to start being able to do as an industry is make it interesting for top-notch computer engineering talent to come into the field and help us do better.
Denise, I wanted to ask, you were at Port Authority for a number of years, working on really complex infrastructure projects. Were there any, projects or just experiences, major takeaways from your time there, just in terms of observing how to make some of the construction processes, design processes more efficient? Just since you're on sort of the other side of the table now, I'm curious, sort of.
Well, I think that there's lots of processes that we put in place at the Port Authority. And you talk about real-time design. When we were working at LaGuardia Airport, doing the terminal there early on, I think the reviews, I think the way it was mandated, and this is years ago, would be every 2 weeks, which if someone's building something, they don't want to wait 2 weeks to see, you know, something be built or or to see the document uploaded. So we changed that, for instance, to be every night, because if you really want to see clash or any issues, you want to do that before the next day when they're building something, you know, adding something to it, to the construction. So those are kind of some of the things that we changed in our specifications in the use of building information modeling. We also did digital transformation. For instance, if you think about it, and this may be silly, but you talk about invoices, and when people get paid, consultants get paid, it used to take on average over 100 days for a consultant, a sub-consultant to get paid. And we're like, why? Because it touches so many different people, and it was paper, right? And paper approvals. So what we did is I had developers working for me, and we developed a digital workflow, which 120 days went down to like 15 to 30. And that was when they got the electronic check sent to them, which was a huge deal. So it's really having, like I said, that champion and looking at the different workflows and workflows that don't work or workflows that can be improved. So it's workflows and efficiency. And we looked at, you know, things in design and construction, created standards, because that was really important. People were using different standards when they were doing their CAD and then eventually into building information modeling. Now they're looking at VDC, they're looking at artificial intelligence, because I still have my friends there. But I think they're pretty savvy. And now they're also looking at, you know, we talked about design build, alternate project delivery, and how you interface that with new technology. So, but you have to welcome the change. Not everybody, when we were looking at, just so you know, when we were looking at, let's just say something simple like the invoice system, there are so many, you know, Quarter 30 has 4 different, you know, line departments. All the different invoices were touched by somebody different. And just getting all those people in a room and saying, hey, this is how we're doing it, and to get buy-in, and people have different workflows. And it takes time, and we had to shadow people to basically understand what is the workflow. And we reduced the time. I mean, we tremendously. And that was done for, and that's just a simple explanation of how we did it with invoices, but we did it other digital transformation and other workflows also in terms of asset management, in terms of tenant alternation reviews of how, you know, you have a client who's putting something up for a tenant, and what's their review cycle, and why does it take so long? So we looked at transformation in a lot of the workflows to make it more for, you know, customer friendly, the client experience.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the reality is there's serial owners, right, that have internal resources and do this for a living. And then you have like owners that, you know, they don't have 10 active projects. They maybe have 1 active project every 3 years. And so they have like great dependence on their vendors, right? Their architects and their engineering firms and their contractors. And I think for those folks that are not serial builders, they can't really dictate or that are up to speed. They're starting to get smart around, you know, the technology exists. I don't understand why I have to like why do I have to send a physical check? Are you kidding me? Like, I don't even know where our physical checks are. You know, it's that kind of thing. So I think there's a little bit of, I like when I work with kind of owners that don't build a lot, because they just have what the industry would say is unrealistic demands, but they're really not that unrealistic, because they're just not stuck in like, this is just the way it is, right? This is the way we do things. They don't get caught up in that narrative at all. They're like, no, I'm writing you a check. I'm paying you money. You do it how I want to do it, right? So, and I think, you know, with transparency payments, you know, it's a really tough industry when you carry billions of dollars of risk. The margins aren't that great, and then it's forever to get paid. And then we wonder why people don't want to come into the industry. But, you know, I think there's a lot of innovation happening around payments and payment approval. I think there's a lot of innovation around like taking away all these people that have to be in the middle of approving things that really don't know that much, right? A contract administrator doesn't know how to necessarily read a set of drawings. So it's really like this built up bureaucracy that we're starting to see being kind of taken down.
What are some of the not unrealistic demands that some of these owners are making?
Like, why can't, I had one owner tell me, I get more data from my son's middle school than I get from my contractor. And I get it all right here on my iPad. Like this idea of I'm going to fax something or PDF something. When you start my project, I'm spending hundreds of millions of dollars with you. It's not like I'm spending a couple of dollars, right? Or even if I'm spending $10 million, where's my app? How do I get my status? I don't want to talk to you. I'm running a business, right? I have a core business I'm running. This real estate project, this construction project is a side project that I'm not equipped to even manage. So why don't I have it all right here? And why are we having calls? Why are we having meetings? And it was funny, early in my engineering career, I would send out drawings and my boss would say, you need to go meet with them. And I was like, I don't understand. I sent them the drawings. And he's like, you understand 99% of owners don't know how to read drawings. You're asking them to approve something that they can't even read. So you need to go over there and read it to them and explain what's going on, because that's not what they do for a living. They're an accountant. They don't come from the industry. And, I think early days of BIM, and I still think the greatest value of BIM is 3D visualization. People want to talk about everything else, but being able to demonstrate, when we talk to owners and, we say, so you're spending $50 million to buy a product sight unseen, right? So when you think about that, that's insane. You're spending $50 million to buy something. And oh, by the way, I don't know what its energy consumption will really be. I kind of know what the cost will be, and I kind of know what the schedule will be. But nonetheless, I'm spending $50 million and I get no data. I get no information.
Wow.
And I think that's where you're starting to see owners say, like, I don't know what you do for a living, but why wouldn't you send it? I had one owner tell me, I saw on HGTV, they show these renovations in 3D. Why can't I get that? I'm spending $50 million with you.
Well, they can, so if they want it, so it's out there. One of the things we do, AECOM does, and in my prior job, we had dashboards. That was really important. One of the things that when we were looking at one of the clients, we put a plan together of the whole, let's say, airport, and said, okay, this is the work that's going on. You can have a schedule, a weekly schedule to see where the work is going on, different contractors coming in, the whole sequence is there, and it was updated live. That was really useful for a general manager, and we have lots of, they're available because we've used dashboards,
and
performance, KPIs.
Yeah, that all applies to someone that is a serial owner and knows what.
I know. So someone would say, with that kind of money, why aren't they? It's money. And if they don't have those KPIs, someone could say shame on them for not having that. So, yeah. Catherine, did we answer your question?
You did. Yeah, I wanted to shift that we have one question in the Q&A box. It's from John Murphy. He asks, do you see a role for workspace utilization and environmental monitoring sensing technologies post-pandemic? And what challenges do you see for companies considering implementing these technologies?
I see it for post-pandemic and before the pandemic. I think they were both important to do.
Yeah. So there's sensors everywhere, right? Your phone is a sensor. You're seeing massive deployment of sensor technology, whether it's a camera, whether it's water leak detection, et cetera. So really the cost of sensors, back in 1994, when I was deploying job site sensors, my budget was hundreds of thousands of dollars. When I look back at that, I could have probably done all those things with $100 today, right? So the cost of sensors, there's no reason why you don't stick a sensor on everything, right? They're on the job site in the building, cameras, it's all heavily software driven. So the idea of a building or an asset being able to be managed remotely and not having to go on property to get data that's where we're at. And I think with the pandemic, it's definitely been a catalyst for that. And we're seeing it every day, right? We're seeing all of a sudden, and what's interesting is a lot of this technology was sitting on the shelves, right? Elevator companies absolutely had sensor technology around occupancy, everything, but no one ever bought it because, like, why do I need that? Right? Why do I need such a thing? Or having computer vision technology going across your security cameras. Well, I've got a team in the security office looking at cameras. Why do I need computer vision? Now all of a sudden we're saying, oh, well, I'm not going to have a security team on site, so I do need technology and sensors to really help me know what's going on when nobody's there. And so we're seeing a lot of that around energy management. You talk about occupancy around the pandemic, but just the idea of like how a building and how the energy is used when there's no there, and really understanding, predicting occupancy. That's kind of becoming commonplace these days. But there's a sensor on everything, and they're just getting cheaper and better every day.
We're using sensors a lot. You use it for traffic planning, traffic modeling, pedestrian modeling. One of the things that we were doing is mobilytics. When some of the agencies asked us to come back and help them with return to service and monitor the pedestrian flow of people getting on trains or how many people are getting on. That was all done by sensors. So it plays an important role. And
got another question from the audience. What are your thoughts on autonomous excavators and autonomous drywall systems? Can it be applied to NYC construction? It's a very specific question.
For sure. Robotics has gotten cheaper as well. So when you start looking at automation, there's tons, and if you look at whether it's drywall automation, we see a couple, and we see a lot of this innovation happening in Europe, mostly Germany, quite honestly. Automated scaffolding, and then you have the automation piece, because robotics is, what I can build for 50 grand robotic wise, that's highly efficient for 50 grand is amazing. Even like 5 years ago would have taken me $500,000 to build what I can build for 50,000 today. So it's getting cheaper and cheaper, which is honestly, that is a fundamental constraint of our industry, is it has to be cheap. It has to be inexpensive. And so when you look at like equipment rental companies that we talk to a lot, they're all trying to figure out how to deploy this. The other thing that's really neat that we're seeing more and more of is exoskeletal. So the idea, so if you think about it, a brick is a brick size because that is what's comfortable for a human to transport across a site, right? There's a lot of materials on a job site. Their form factor is based on a human being able to deal with it. So as you start thinking about exoskeletal and being able to lift something a lot heavier or a lot bigger, all of a sudden now you don't have to, it becomes a high efficiency to not have to have smaller units of building materials on a job site. The automated excavators, honestly, Caterpillar, like 15 years ago, I saw a grading machine that could go grade a job site, a project without a human being on it. So you're starting to see a lot more of that. I think what's more important is it's now becoming cheaper and cheaper to deploy versus saying, nobody wants to hear that it's a 10-year payback. Nobody gets excited about that. They don't mind that with like a forklift or something. But when you talk about technology, people want to see a very quick payback because they also know there's a highly, they become obsolete pretty quickly. There's always a new something. So we're seeing a lot of deal flow around that.
How long do you think it will take for it to be kind of a more mainstream site on technology or on construction sites, seeing robots on construction sites? I think earlier this month, Turner Construction had launched a pilot program that they have a robot roving certain construction sites. I'm just curious how long it'll take.
Yeah, Boston Dynamics, their little thing Spot, their little dog, that's very Black Mirror and very cool. But I think, that, and I think, the other thing is like, so some of our investors are from Japan and Singapore, so we have a lot of Asian investors. So I was in Singapore and Japan last summer. And it was absolutely fascinating about how they think about, I think New York City is very similarly, right? You have a constraint where you don't have a lot of place to lay down materials. It's very expensive to operate. But I went to a job site in Tokyo where they had a crane holding up a tent over the entire job site so that they didn't have to worry about weather and they could run 24/7. And all the tools were being delivered by automated rovers. So so if you needed a tool and it was downstairs, you didn't go do it. You ordered it on your app. The rover went and got it from the supply house and came up in this like rover elevator and came and delivered it right to you where you were at. And I was like, this is amazing. And they're like, no, this is just what we do. For them, it was like, this is just how we do things because it's so expensive. Average commute in Tokyo, it's like 2 hours for workers to make it into the city. So they have a ton of constraints, and I think the technology exists. I think it's just more, having better adoption of it. There's a lot of, and then there's new stuff coming out every day.
Got another question from the audience regarding the environmental sensors. Where do you see the most cost savings around insurance and risk management? Are insurance companies, oops, the question disappeared. Okay. Well, I'll move on to the next question then.
Is there another question?
Yes, there is. Oh, now it's back. Okay. Where do you see the most cost savings around insurance and risk management in reference to the environmental sensors? Are insurance companies a driving force for implementing these systems?
Are insurance companies, you mean from a crash management for environmental for the insurance? I don't think the insurance companies, I don't believe, and KP, you could correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think they're the drivers to putting the sensors in environmental. I mean, I don't see that.
Yeah, well, what we're seeing, if you think our industry is backwards, go spend time with insurance people.
Yeah, I don't see it. Yeah,
the worst. So I think what we've seen is deploying sensors around people that are either self-insuring or it's at a limit of damage that's below the deductible, so it's not worth claiming on. So we have an investment in a company called Kairos. Kairos does water leak detection in multifamily. And if you think about the cost, if your apartment floods because, we're all home running 3 loads of dishes a day now, apparently, and your dishwasher overflows and you weren't paying attention and it messes up your unit and the unit below you, that's expensive and it's very inconvenient from a tenant experience perspective. But it's probably not expensive enough to file a claim with your insurance provider. So a lot of the IoT we're seeing around sensors is very focused on things that are either self-insured. So a lot of property owners, they'll have kind of self-insurance up to a certain point, and then they'll have like another policy, and then they layer these policies to manage risk. So the minute it starts to become something around trying to convince an insurance company to reduce their premiums, that is a tough fight to fight because there's a lot of people that depend on those premiums. They don't get excited about reducing the premiums. But if it's something that is focused on either firms that are self-insured or it's below what would be a typical deductible, like the average damage is below the deductible, then there's like immediate, our company Kairos, they can't keep up with orders because they fit in that below the deductible area.
One of the other things that I want to talk about that we didn't mention is the use of drones. That's becoming, I wouldn't say popular, but it's really being used very much in the construction industry, especially when you're looking at inspections. We had a major arena that we were working on, and there was actually it was already built, and we were looking at some water leak infiltration. And to have someone scale that, we put some drones up there, and they were able to look at looking at camera sensing, heat sensing to find out where the infiltration was coming from. So a little different than sensors in a sense, but we haven't been talking about drones, and I want to add a plug for that.
Yeah, drones, other than the movie industry, the construction industry is the #2 consumer of drone technology in the world. We just invested in a company called Aaron that's actually a spin out. It's actually New York based. And they pull they're not in the drone business. They pull all the video and pictures off of drones to inspect bridges, inspect facades. As y'all may or may not know, most of our bridges require inspection and haven't been gotten to. And it's a problem. And so the problem they solved is like, we can take pictures or video with a drone, a camera, whatever, and we can have the computer vision AI tool analyze it for integrity as well as facades. So, I got really excited about Aaron because in my first job, I had to rappel off of the side of buildings and look at facades. And the whole way down, wondering why I went to college. Like, isn't there someone else that could do this?
Probably with the clipboard and pencil, not even with the tablet.
Exactly.
That would, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think eventually I got a digital camera, but but still wondering like why I went to college to be in an extreme sport, essentially. It's fascinating, right? So I immediately got emotionally attached to Aaron because I'm like, oh, you can keep me from being off the side of dangling from the side of a building. I'm excited. But yeah, the drones and really it's the imagery off of drones.
Absolutely.
That becomes really, really amazing to leverage for facilities and predictive analytics. People say that word, but they forget is for predictive analytics to work, you have to have a frequency of sampling of data. And it's unrealistic for people to sample data at a high frequency. Whereas if you're getting it off of sensors or drone technology, video, then you can actually do predictive analytics.
I know in New York, they've been considering for some time allowing drone inspections for facades. I think it's something that comes up every year, after there's some sort of incident involving facades. So.
Yeah, it's a problem. I mean, if you think about weather events, cell towers, every time there's a weather event over a certain amount, someone has to climb up that cell tower and check all the radios. I mean, it's also, the issue is also like in a weather event, it's a surge of activity to determine risk. And there just aren't enough people mobilized, to go do these inspections.
Well, we're coming up on the hour. I wanted to close out by asking how you think your role in the next 5 years could change, given all the different tools and innovations we've been talking about this hour. Start with Denise.
Okay, so my role, I think soon it's not. Let's go back. I think we're going to be looking at smart cities. All right. So I don't know how much it's going to be my role or my role that comes out of what the digital technology and innovation is going to be out there. We didn't talk about autonomous vehicles. There's just so much that we're looking at. They're looking at airports that you look at the Jetsons, planes that are going to be autonomous at one time. So I think there's going to be a lot of movement. And I would say in the next 20 years, you're going to see crazy amount of new technology that's going to be out there, that's going to be change the way we live our lives for the better. I mean, if you think about 10 years ago, the cell phones or, smart TVs, they didn't exist. And our children are as KP said, are living a different life. They're going to see a huge change into the way behavior is going to exist. So what that means for me, really just looking at the technologies and see how we could apply them better and faster to the way we do our business and industry, and be that advocate champion to use that. And the more that we know, the better it is, and it's better, and really informing our clients on the benefit of using these tools, because there's many tools, as we said, in the toolbox. So how do we use it to move the industry forward?
Yeah, I mean, 5 years feels like a long time. It's not that long, but what I think starts to happen, we're already seeing it. The traditional roles of AEC firms, they're shifting. At some point, we will start to understand that computers are more accurate and better, and there's a better way of doing things. We're not going to, and maybe the roles start to shift in terms of how we think about how we recruit employees and what we do with them. I think distributed workforce, we've always been virtual. We have a person in New York and Boulder and Chicago. We've always been virtual. We invest all over the world. We thought it was cute when everybody said, oh, they invested in a company without meeting the founders. I'm like, that's what we always do. We don't get to fly all over the place and meet with founders. We've always invested via Zoom. So I think that will continue to accelerate. I do think also, interesting enough, a lot of the talent drain that's happened in our industry, I think as you start to go virtual, we can keep kind of the more knowledge workers that are retiring a little bit longer. You take away the commute, you say you can work from your beach house and be an advisor and work 10 hours a week because you're a 50-year experienced architect or whatever. I think you're going to see a little bit of that workforce engage, which I think is a wonderful thing. And I think you're going to continue to see massive automation. I also think we are continuing to see the walls being broken down. If you think about it, why does a hospital exist? It exists for the patients. But when you're designing a hospital, you're dealing with a hospital administrator and maybe a highly egotistical chief of staff doctor that says, I need all these things. They barely talk to the nurses and they rarely talk to the patients. And so if you think about how we need space and use, it's much more being driven by the actual consumer of the space and not all these people that mediate the narrative. If you want to know what a cancer patient wants, you go ask them. You don't ask the doctors and everybody, right? So I think that's shifting because we can, because the technology exists. It's like voting, right? Instead of the Electoral College, we should all have an app and vote. Like, we don't need all these archaic systems to distribute the data. We can go straight to the source and get rid of all the layers. And since Catherine covered political stuff, I thought I'd leave her something.
Thank you both so much. This was great. Christina, did you want to?
Yeah, I just want to thank you. Thank you, Katie, KP, and Denise. It was really a great discussion. And so thank you for taking the time to share your experience and your vision for the future. A lot for everyone to grab onto and to run with. So thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Also, just a final plug to please join the final webinar of the fall series, which will be on Wednesday, December 16th. And that's called New Innovation in Flooring, Flip Rooms in Half the Time. And you can find that on the BuildingsNY website. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.